My name is Hannah, and I'm 28 years old. 6 months ago, I was sitting in my tiny studio apartment, crying into a bowl of instant ramen. Today, I'm the CEO of a multi-million-dollar tech company. But this isn't just a success story. This is about family betrayal, unexpected allies, and discovering that sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones who push you toward your greatest transformation. It all started at my brother's engagement dinner, the kind of fancy restaurant where the menu doesn't have prices and the waiter judges you for ordering water instead of wine. I was wearing my best dress, which honestly wasn't saying much. It was a black number from Target that I'd owned for 3 years. But I felt good. I was excited to celebrate my brother Marcus and his fiancée, Vanessa. That excitement died the moment Vanessa opened her mouth. "Hannah, sweetie," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Are you still working at that little startup? When are you going to get a real job?" The table went quiet. My parents shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Marcus stared at his plate like it held the secrets of the universe. But I smiled and said I loved my work as a project coordinator at Tech Vision Solutions. Vanessa laughed. Actually laughed. "Project coordinator? That's just a fancy way of saying assistant, right? Marcus told me you're basically broke. Living in that shoebox apartment, eating ramen every night." My cheeks burned. Every word was technically true, but the way she said it made me feel like trash on the sidewalk. Like I was something embarrassing that needed to be swept away. "Money isn't everything," I managed to say. "Easy to say when you don't have any," Vanessa shot back. She turned to the rest of the table like she was performing for an audience. "I just think it's so sad when people settle for mediocrity. Some of us have ambition." That's when she said the words that changed everything. The words that would echo in my head for months. The words that would ultimately become the catalyst for the most dramatic transformation of my life. "Let's be honest. You're broke trash, Hannah. You always have been, and you always will be." The silence that followed was deafening. I looked around the table, waiting for someone to defend me. My parents avoided eye contact. Marcus mumbled something about everyone being different. My other relatives suddenly found their phones fascinating. No one said a word. I excused myself to the bathroom and cried until my mascara ran. When I looked in the mirror, I saw exactly what Vanessa saw. A 28-year-old woman in a cheap dress, working a job that barely paid rent, with no savings and no prospects. But something else happened in that bathroom mirror. Something shifted deep inside me. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the first spark of a fire that had been waiting years to ignite. I made a decision that night. I decided that Vanessa was wrong about me. More importantly, I decided to prove it. If you're watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you're viewing from. Before I tell you about this life-changing decision, hit like and subscribe to hear more real stories about family loyalty and betrayal that might just change how you see your own relationships. What I didn't know that night was that my boss, Richard Blackstone, had been watching me for months. Richard was one of those mysterious billionaire types, the kind of man who wore $5,000 suits but drove himself to work in a beat-up Honda. He owned Tech Vision Solutions, but he also owned about 15 other companies across different industries. Most employees never saw him. He was like a ghost in the building, there one day and gone the next. But apparently, he'd been observing my work more closely than anyone realized. The Monday after that disastrous family dinner, Richard called me into his office. I thought I was getting fired. My performance had been distracted lately, and I'd been struggling with some of the larger projects. Instead, he offered me something that would change my life forever. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how I went from broke trash to CEO in 6 months, You need to understand who I really was before that night. You need to understand the family dynamics that shaped me, the relationships that defined me, and the dreams I'd been too afraid to chase. Because this story isn't just about money or success. It's about discovering your own worth when everyone around you has convinced you that you have none. Growing up, I was always the quiet one in the Chen family. My parents immigrated from Taiwan when I was 5, working double shifts to build a life in America. They sacrificed everything for their children, but somewhere along the way, their dreams became more about what we could achieve than who we could become. Marcus was the golden child. 3 years older, valedictorian, full scholarship to MIT, now a successful software engineer at Google. He could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. Every family gathering started with updates about Marcus's latest promotion, his new car, his expensive apartment in Silicon Valley. Then there was me. Good grades, but not great. Decent at everything. Exceptional at nothing. I went to state college, graduated with a degree in communications, and stumbled into the working world without a clear direction. My parents never said I was a disappointment, but they didn't need to. It was in the way they'd hesitate before telling their friends what I did for work, the way they'd quickly change the subject when neighbors asked about my career, the way they'd light up talking about Marcus and Dim when the conversation turned to me. Tech Vision Solutions hired me 2 years ago as an administrative assistant. The job posting said project coordinator, but Vanessa wasn't entirely wrong. I answered phones, scheduled meetings, and organized files. But I also attended strategy sessions, contributed to brainstorming meetings, and slowly started understanding how the business really worked. My apartment was indeed a shoebox. 400 square feet in a building where the elevator worked half the time, and the heating was questionable. But it was mine. I'd furnished it with secondhand finds and plants from the grocery store. It wasn't much, but I'd made it home. The ramen comment stung because it was accurate. Most nights I ate simple meals because I was saving every possible dollar. Not for luxury, but for security. Growing up watching my parents stress about money taught me to fear being broke more than being lonely. My social life was practically non-existent. A few college friends who'd scattered across the country for better opportunities. Co-workers who were friendly during office hours but had their own lives after 5 p.m. Weekend visits to my parents' house, where I'd sit through subtle comparisons to Marcus and his various achievements. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Like you're taking up space that could be better used by someone more successful, more interesting, more worthy of attention. But there was one person who saw me differently. My grandmother, Nai. Nai was 84 and sharp as a razor blade. She lived in a small apartment across town, and I visited her every Sunday with groceries and stories from work. Nai never asked about my salary or my apartment size. She asked about my dreams. She'd make tea and listen while I talked about ideas I had for improving processes at work, or apps I thought should exist, or business concepts that kept me awake at night. Dreams are like seeds, she'd say in her mix of English and Mandarin. They need time to grow, but they also need the right soil. I thought she was just being a supportive grandmother. I didn't realize she was preparing me for what was coming. The week before Marcus's engagement dinner, something significant happened at work. Richard Blackstone had visited our office for one of his rare appearances. Most employees scattered like mice when he walked the halls, but I was in the conference room working on a presentation about client retention strategies. He'd paused in the doorway and asked what I was working on. Instead of giving a generic answer, I explained my analysis of why we were losing clients after 6 months and outlined 3 specific solutions that could improve retention by 30%. He listened without interrupting, asked 2 pointed questions, and then nodded. "Interesting perspective," he said, and walked away. I thought that was the end of it. Just a random interaction with the mysterious boss who probably wouldn't remember my name 5 minutes later. Looking back, I realized that conversation was the real beginning of everything. It was the moment Richard started paying attention, the moment he began seeing potential that I didn't even know I possessed. But first, I had to survive Vanessa's verbal assault and the devastating silence of my own family. The night of the DI engagement dinner, I went home and did something I'd never done before. I wrote down exactly what I wanted from life, not what my parents expected or what society demanded, but what I genuinely wanted. The list was longer than I expected. That Monday morning after the engagement dinner, I walked into Tech Vision Solutions feeling like a completely different person. The weekend had been spent researching Richard Blackstone, studying the company's financial reports, and preparing for what I somehow knew was coming. When his assistant called at 9:30 a.m. asking me to come to the executive floor, I wasn't surprised. Terrified, but not surprised. Richard's office was intimidating in its simplicity. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a massive desk with nothing on it except a single folder, and chairs that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He gestured for me to sit, then got straight to the point. "Hannah, I've been watching your work for 8 months. You see problems that others miss and solve them before they become critical. Tell me, what do you think is wrong with this company?" Most people would have given a diplomatic answer, something safe about minor inefficiencies, or room for growth. Instead, I told him the truth. "We're bleeding clients because we treat symptoms instead of diseases," I said. "Our customer service is reactive, not proactive. Our pricing model doesn't reflect actual value delivery. And our employee retention is terrible because middle management doesn't trust their teams with real responsibility." He leaned back in his chair. "Go on." For 20 minutes, I outlined everything I'd observed from my position at the bottom of the corporate ladder. The communication gaps between departments, the talented employees who were underutilized because of hierarchical thinking, the client feedback that never reached decision makers. When I finished, Richard opened the folder on his desk and slid it across to me. "I'm offering you the position of Director of Operations. 60% salary increase, equity package, and complete authority to implement the changes you just described. You'd be managing a team of 12 people, most with MBAs and twice your experience." I stared at the contract. The salary alone was more than I'd made in 2 years combined. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you understand this business from the ground up. Because you see solutions where others see insurmountable problems. And because you're hungry for something more than a paycheck." But here's where the story gets complicated. Richard's offer came with a catch. "There's a board meeting in 6 months," he explained. "The shareholders want to sell the company to a larger corporation. I believe we can grow beyond what they're imagining, but I need to prove it. If you can turn our retention rates around and increase revenue by 40%, in 6 months I'll make you CEO when I step back to focus on my other ventures." CEO. The word hung in the air like a promise and a threat simultaneously. "And if I fail?" I asked. "Then we all fail together, and you'll have learned more in 6 months than most people learn in 5 years. I thought about Vanessa calling me broke trash. I thought about my parents' disappointed faces. I thought about Nai asking about my dreams every Sunday. "I'll take it," I said. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of learning, implementing, and trying not to drown in responsibilities. I'd never imagined having. My team was skeptical at first. Some were openly resentful about reporting to someone they'd previously considered beneath them. But slowly, things started changing. We restructured client onboarding to address issues before they became problems. We implemented feedback loops that actually reached decision makers. We started treating employees like intelligent humans instead of replaceable cogs. The numbers began improving almost immediately. Meanwhile, my family life became more complicated. Marcus called to ask why I'd missed Sunday dinner at our parents' house. I explained that I was working late most nights and weekends, learning everything I could about operations management, financial modeling, and team leadership. "Don't let this new job go to your head," he warned. "Remember where you come from." But where I came from was exactly what I was trying to change. The real test came when Vanessa started planning their wedding and expected me to help with preparations. She assumed I had plenty of free time since I was just working at a startup. When I explained that I couldn't commit to wedding planning because of work responsibilities, she laughed. "Still pretending that little job is important? Hannah, you're a coordinator at a company no one's heard of. This is Marcus's wedding we're talking about." I didn't tell her about my promotion. Something inside me wanted to wait until I could prove that her assessment of me was completely wrong. That decision would soon become the most satisfying choice I ever made. 3 months into my new role, the transformation was undeniable. Client retention had improved by 35%. Revenue was up 42%. Our employee satisfaction scores were the highest in company history. Richard started including me in board meetings, and I could see the surprise in shareholders' faces when I presented quarterly results. But at home, I was still just Hannah the underachiever. Marcus's wedding was approaching, and Vanessa had become increasingly demanding about my participation. She wanted me to coordinate transportation for out-of-town guests, manage the rehearsal dinner timeline, and basically serve as an unpaid wedding planner. "It's the least you can do," she said during one particularly condescending phone call, "since you can't afford to give us a decent wedding gift." I'd actually already ordered their gift, a beautiful set of crystal glasses that cost more than my old monthly salary. But I kept that information to myself. The breaking point came at the bachelor-bachelorette party weekend. Vanessa had planned an expensive weekend at a luxury resort, assuming I'd either skip it or embarrass myself by staying in the cheapest room available. Instead, I booked the penthouse suite. When I walked into the resort lobby in a designer dress that actually fit properly, carrying luggage that wasn't held together with tape, Vanessa's face went through several interesting expressions. "Hannah? How did you afford? This place is $500 a night." "Work's been going well," I said simply. The weekend was a revelation. Without the family dynamics clouding everyone's judgment, people actually listened to what I had to say. I found myself naturally taking leadership roles, organizing activities, solving problems that arose, and generally being the person others turned to when things needed to get done. Vanessa watched this transformation with increasing irritation. By Sunday morning, she'd had enough. "I don't know what game you're playing," she cornered me by the pool. "But this isn't you. You're trying to be someone you're not, and it's embarrassing." "What if this is exactly who I am?" I replied. "What if you just never bothered to look?" That's when she delivered what she thought was the killing blow. "Please, you're still the same broke trash who needed her parents to co-sign for that. Pathetic apartment. Designer dress and fancy hotel room don't change your fundamentals." Something crystallized in that moment. Not anger, exactly, but clarity. "You're right about one thing, Vanessa. I am fundamentally different from you, but not in the way you think." 2 weeks later, Richard called me into his office with news that would change everything. "The board meeting moved up to next Friday," he said. "Someone leaked that we're considering rejecting the acquisition offer, and the shareholders want answers immediately." My stomach dropped. We'd planned for 6 months of preparation. I had 2 weeks. "Here's what I'm thinking," Richard continued. "Instead of me presenting our growth strategy, you present it. Show them exactly what you've accomplished and what you're capable of achieving. You want me to present to the board? As Director of Operations? Richard smiled. Actually, I want you to present as CEO-elect. If you can convince them that TechVision's future is brighter under young leadership than under corporate acquisition, the position is yours immediately. That night, I called Nainai and told her everything. About the promotion, the results, the board meeting, and the CEO opportunity. Dreams are like seeds, she repeated her familiar phrase. But you know what seeds need most? Good soil. I answered automatically. No, she said. They need someone brave enough to plant them. The board meeting was scheduled for the same day as Marcus and Vanessa's wedding rehearsal dinner. The timing wasn't coincidental. I suspected Vanessa had intentionally planned it to conflict with what she assumed was my unimportant work schedule. I had a choice to make. Attend the rehearsal dinner and maintain family peace, or present to the board and potentially become CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. For someone who'd spent her entire life trying not to disappoint her family, the choice should have been obvious. But as I stood in my apartment the night before, looking at two outfits laid out on my bed, a simple dress for the rehearsal dinner and a power suit for the boardroom, I realized something profound. I was tired of being small to make other people comfortable. The next morning, I chose the power suit. The boardroom was intimidating in a way Richard's office had never been. 12 shareholders, 6 board members, and enough collective wealth to buy a small country. They looked at me like I was a child playing dress-up in mommy's clothes. I started my presentation at exactly 2 p.m. For 30 minutes, I walked them through every metric, every improvement, every strategic decision that had transformed TechVision from a struggling startup to a thriving company. I showed them market projections, competitive analyses, and growth strategies that would triple our revenue within 2 years. When I finished, the room was silent. Then the questions started. Aggressive, probing questions designed to expose inexperience and uncertainty. But I'd spent 3 months living and breathing every aspect of this business. I answered each question with data, examples, and confidence I didn't know I possessed. At 3:15, while I was explaining our expansion strategy, my phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Where are you? Rehearsal dinner starts in an hour." I turned off my phone and continued presenting. At 3:30, board member Patricia Morrison asked the question I'd been dreading. "Ms. Chen, you're asking us to trust a multi-million-dollar company to someone with no executive experience. Why shouldn't we take the acquisition offer and guarantee our returns?" I looked around the room at faces that reminded me of every authority figure who'd ever underestimated me. "Because safe choices don't create extraordinary results," I said. 6 months ago, this company was bleeding money and talent. You hired consultants who recommended cost-cutting and downsizing. Instead, I invested in people and processes. The results speak for themselves. I pulled up our latest client satisfaction scores. These numbers represent something an acquisition can't replicate. They represent a culture that values innovation over efficiency, growth over security, and potential over pedigree. At 4 p.m., they asked me to step outside while they deliberated. I sat in the hallway checking my phone. 17 missed calls from Marcus. 8 texts from Vanessa, each more demanding than the last. 3 voicemails from my mother asking where I was and reminding me about family obligations. At 4:30, Richard opened the boardroom door. "Congratulations, CEO Chen. The next few hours were a blur of paperwork, handshakes, and phone calls to lawyers and accountants. By the time I left the building, it was 8 p.m. The rehearsal dinner was over. The damage was done. My phone had 43 missed calls. I drove straight to Nainai's apartment. She took one look at my face and put the kettle on for tea. "Tell me everything," she said. When I finished the story, she smiled the proudest smile I'd ever seen. Your mother called earlier, she said. She was very upset that you missed the dinner. She said you were being selfish and disrespectful. My heart sank. Maybe I should have... No. Nai's voice was firm. Your mother is afraid because you're becoming someone she doesn't understand. Fear makes people say cruel things. The wedding was the next day. I almost didn't go. But something Richard said stuck with me. True leaders don't avoid difficult conversations. I showed up to the ceremony in a new dress and confidence I'd never worn before. The whispers started immediately. Word had spread about my absence from the rehearsal dinner, but not about the reason why. After the ceremony, during cocktail hour, Vanessa cornered me near the bar. I can't believe you missed the rehearsal dinner for work, she hissed. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was? What kind of job is so important that you'd skip your brother's wedding rehearsal? I looked at this woman who'd called me broke trash 6 months earlier. This woman who'd made me feel small and worthless and ashamed. The kind of job where I'm CEO, I said quietly. She laughed. Actually laughed. CEO of what? That little startup? Hannah, stop lying. It's pathetic. That's when Marcus appeared with his phone in his hand. His face was white. Vanessa, he said slowly. I just Googled Hannah's company. He turned the phone toward us. The screen showed a TechBeat article with the headline, 28-year-old Hannah, Chen named CEO of TechVision Solutions in surprise board decision. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. 1 year later, I'm sitting in my corner office on the 42nd floor, looking out over a city that once felt impossible to conquer. TechVision Solutions has grown from 37 employees to over 200. Our revenue has increased by 300%. We've been featured in Forbes, TechCrunch, and Harvard Business Review. But the numbers aren't what matter most. What matters is the company culture we've built. The mentorship programs for young professionals. The employee ownership structure that gives everyone a stake in our success. The innovation labs where crazy ideas become breakthrough products. What matters is that I've learned to trust my instincts instead of seeking approval from people who never believed in me anyway. My relationship with my family has evolved in unexpected ways. My parents struggled initially with my success. They'd spent so many years positioning Marcus as the achiever that they didn't know how to process my transformation. But slowly, they've begun to see me differently. Marcus and I have grown closer, actually. Away from Vanessa's influence, he's admitted that he always knew I was capable of more. He said he was proud of me for not letting anyone, including him, define my limitations. Vanessa and I maintain polite distance. She's never apologized for calling me broke trash, but she's never repeated it either. Sometimes I catch her watching me at family gatherings like she's trying to figure out how the person she dismissed so completely became someone she now has to respect. The truth is, I was always this person. I just needed the right opportunity and the courage to claim it. If you've watched this far, I want you to know that your story matters too. Maybe you're sitting in your own tiny apartment, eating ramen, feeling invisible. Maybe someone in your life has convinced you that you're not capable of more. They're wrong. Drop a comment and tell me about a time someone underestimated you. I read every single comment, and I want to hear your story. Your struggles matter. Your dreams matter. You matter. The biggest lesson I've learned is that transformation doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen. Every small choice you make toward believing in yourself creates momentum. Every boundary you set teaches people how to treat you. Every risk you take expands your sense of what's possible. Hit that like button if this story resonated with you. Subscribe for more real stories about overcoming family dynamics, building confidence, and creating the life you actually want. I still visit Nai every Sunday. We still drink tea and talk about dreams. But now our conversations are different. Instead of wondering what's possible, we plan what's next. Last month, I started a mentorship program for young women in tech. We call it Seeds and Soil, after Nai's favorite metaphor. Every month, I meet with 20 women who remind me of who I used to be. Women who are talented but overlooked. Women who have ideas but lack platforms. Women who need someone to believe in them before they can believe in themselves. Because here's what I've learned. Success isn't about proving wrong the people who hurt you. It's about proving right the people who believe in you, especially when that person is yourself. The little girl who felt invisible in her own family is still part of me. But now she's the CEO of her own story. If you're struggling with family members who don't see your potential, remember that their limitations are not your limitations. If you're working a job that feels small, look for ways to grow within it or beyond it. If you're living in a studio apartment eating ramen, know that your current circumstances are not your final destination. Most importantly, if someone calls, "You broke trash," let them. Their words say everything about their character and nothing about your potential. The seeds of your transformation are already planted. They're waiting for you to give them the soil they need to grow. What dream are you ready to plant today? Tell me in the comments below. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they're capable of more than they think. And remember, the best revenge against people who underestimate you is becoming everything they said you couldn't be. Your breakthrough is waiting. Go claim it.